You're tuned in to the Reality Fred podcast. Food and travel, cool stuff, weird stuff, entertainment, and more. You made the choice to be here, and my friend, you've chosen wisely. Now buckle up, because it's time to get started. It's time for the Reality Fred podcast.
For the month of December, I'm dedicating my podcast episodes to counting down some of my favorite things, and today we'll be counting down my top 10 favorite Scotch whiskies of 2017. I assure you, I very much enjoyed the preparation process for this episode, painstakingly trying each and every whiskey, plus more, to determine the ultimate order as I counted down from number 10 to number 1. And even slide in one or two extra. So sit back, relax, and find your safe space, because it's time for a Scotch whiskey.
When you're by yourself or when the world slows down, Reality Fred. When life decides to give you the run around, Reality Fred. Or when your glass is full and your cigar is just right. Fire up the podcast that keeps you up all night. Reality Fred, I'll say it again. Reality Fred, always there like a friend. You know it's time, so just press play. Reality Fred, come and take me away.
And welcome back, Reality Fred podcast followers. I've got an awesome show lined up today. What I'm going to be doing for the rest of December, for the rest of 2017, for the month of December, I'm dedicating the month of December to being a month of countdowns, if you will. So each of my final podcasts of the year will be like top 10 lists. And tonight we're going to be doing my top 10 scotches for this year. And, you know, that kind of comes from, in the cigar world, of course, this time of the year, we all get excited. We're all anxiously awaiting cigar aficionados' official countdown, but beyond cigar aficionado, of course, I want to make sure that all of the Reality Fred podcast followers out there support my man Will Cooper at cigar-coop.com, and he does an awesome end of the year cigar countdown. I just messaged him a little bit ago, and I believe he said he's going to be kicking that off December 19th. So shout out to Will Cooper, and Will, I'm looking forward to your cigar countdown. Now, I'm going to be doing a couple different countdowns, and in the month of December, and again, tonight I'm doing a Scotch whiskey, my top 10. And obviously, I'm really excited about this one, so this is why we're doing this one first. And I kind of realized that with each of my countdowns, the criteria is a little bit different, and I'll explain that in each episode. But when it comes to the Scotch whiskeys, specifically this episode, my top 10 Scotch whiskeys, for the most part, none of these, nothing on the list here is, I don't have, I'll come on and say I don't have like a Macallan 18 on there. I don't have anything that's hard to find, and I don't have anything that's super expensive, because I don't want to get carried away and be like, oh, the top 10, and be all snooty like that they're all just these super premium, rare, hard to find Scotch whiskeys. I wanted to do more or less, what anybody can find in a store around you and so forth. These are all this top 10 list are all whiskeys that I do have in my collection. Did a little bit of taste testing earlier today just to confirm the order that I wanted to go with. But these are all readily available, and none of these are gonna like break the bank. So as far as the Scotch whiskeys go, that's my criteria. Now, another thing I wanted to do is I didn't want this, I wanted to make these top 10 podcast episodes to end the year easily digestible, meaning I don't want these. I'm going to try to not ramble on forever here today, so I'm going to try to keep each whiskey that I go through to about 1 to 2 minutes of discussion. So I'm just going to at this point get started. Now, the one thing is with the top 10 list. Before we get into the top 10, I do want to make note, and I won't spend a lot of time on these, that I had one honorable mention whiskey, so that's basically number 11, which I'll get to in a second. And there's specifically a Scotch that I wanted to be on this list, but I actually had to take it off. So I'm going to start with this whiskey because essentially what happens is it's apparently no longer available here in the United States. This actually is a Scotch that I discovered this year, immediately fell in love with, got other people to fall in love with, and then it was immediately gone. So let's talk about this one first, and then I'll get into the honorable mention. But basically a whiskey that I wanted to be on this list, but once it became kind of unavailable, I didn't put it in my top 10, but I just really couldn't imagine doing this podcast and not mentioning this whiskey. So first up, Jura Origin. So Jura Origin is a Scotch that I discovered earlier this year. Jura is an island. I believe it's actually north of Islay. So Jura does make island Scotch whiskies. But what was nice about Origin, it was actually a really a lighter, I don't want to say delicate, but it was a lighter, not peaty Scotch. It was fantastic. It was absolutely delicious. The price was pretty darn good, actually. And it's always kind of nice finding, a brand that not everybody just kind of kowtows to, and so that for me and a few friends this year, Jura was a distiller we kind of fell in love with, but specifically Jura Origin. As far as the taste, I wrote down it was thick and full with cereal and barley and some sweetness, but basically a creamy, smooth finish to it. So that was Jura Origin. That's all that I'm going to mention. I'm going to move on from it, but that's one that I really wished I could have put in the top 10. But since we can't get it in the U.S. anymore, now what Jura did basically is they kind of had 4 different whiskeys. They had Origin, Superstition, I think one was called Premonition, and I forget what the other one was. But they had these 4 different styles, and Origin was one of them. And apparently for the U.S. market, they're going. They created just a Jura 10. They just call it the Jura 10. And that's pretty much the only product we're getting going forward, which they say is a combination of Origin and Superstition. But I bought a bottle of it, and I'm frankly not a fan of it. Kind of was really disappointed, to be quite honest. All right, that's Jura Origin. Now, my honorable mention, before we get into the top 10, the honorable mention, essentially the number 11, the whiskey that was in and out of the list. It was in the list, it was out of the list, and once I kind of finalized it, this was one that didn't make the top 10, but it's number 11, and that is the Macallan Double Cask 12 Year. So essentially the Macallan Double Cask 12 Year, it's a 12-year Macallan, and what made it unique and different, it's a combination, it's whiskey aged for 12 years in a European sherry oak cask, as well as a sherry cask made from American oak. It was not an ex-bourbon barrel, so they got American oak, brought it over, made a sherry barrel out of it, then stored the Macallan in it, as well as the European sherry cask, and then after 12 years they married those two together. Very good, very affordable for a Macallan. That rounds out, or that's the honorable mention at number 11. So, now, let's get started. The top 10, Fred's top 10 list of scotches for 2017, and the interesting thing will be to see, how this list shakes out next year. But, at number 10, we have Lagavulin 16. And you gotta have a good peat scotch on your list. And if you like peat, Lagavulin 16, I think, is the best out there in terms of a full mouthful of a peat. It's a quality peat taste, a quality smoky taste, and really high quality Scotch. It's a 16-year, and that's why Lagavulin 16 makes the list. It's not, like I said, to me, I'm not a fan of Ardbeg or really Lafroig, but this is Lagavulin is an Islay. So, real quick, let me go down through some points, and this will kind of start the trend of how I'm going to discuss each one. A much sought after single malt with the massive peat smoke that's typical of Southern Islay, but also offering richness and a dryness that turns it into a truly interesting dram. The 16-year-old has become a benchmark Islay dram from the Lagavulin distillery. As I mentioned, it is an Islay Island whiskey, and as we go through a lot of the Scotches from here on out in the top 10, I'm going to mention some of the awards and honors that the Scotches have mentioned, but specifically as it relates to Lagavulin, it has so many awards, I didn't even bother typing them down. So this is a heavily, heavily awarded Scotch whiskey. Now, the aroma, more like Lapsang Sashalong tea, one of the smokiest noses from Islay. It's big, very, very concentrated, sweet spices, and good mature sherry and creamy vanilla on the nose. The taste of it is very thick and rich, a massive mouthful of malt and sherry with good fruity sweetness, but also a wonderful sweetness, big, powerful peat and oak. And on the finish, long, spicy finish, fig, dates, peat smoke, and vanilla. That's number 10. Moving along, number 9. This one's interesting. Talisker Distillers Edition. Now, the Talisker Distillers Edition, or Talisker Distillery, is out of Isle of Skye, where I visited in April of this year. And I actually, when it comes to like a peaty Scotch, I really, really love Talisker because the Isle of Skye Talisker peated Scotch is not as heavy as the Islay Scotches. So if you like peat but you don't like it overdone like in the Islay Scotches, Talisker makes fantastic peated Scotches, more of that medium range of peat versus what you get out of Islay, but absolutely delicious. Now, this Scotch, the Talisker Distiller Edition, they kind of, almost like a wine, they look at it like vintages, so they kind of make note of each year that it was distilled, and I think that has a lot to do with, because specifically with Isle of Skye, you get a lot of the just the natural elements, the ocean, the sea, the wind, and things like that that all make up the effect on the water and the barley. So this is the bottle that I have out of the store that I got this year is the 2003 edition. So it was distilled in 2003, bottled in 2014, bought by me this year. But this is the Talisker Distiller Edition. It happens to be the 2003, but I think you'll probably notice slight variations, and a lot of that reminds me of when we talked about before Jefferson's ocean aged bourbon. But anyways, getting back, Talisker Distiller Edition. Like I said, this is from Isle of Skye. It's an island whiskey. This particular bottle was distilled in 2003, finally bottled in 2014. It was Whiskey Exchange's 2016 Whiskey of the Year. The 2014 bottling of Talisker Single Malt Scotch Whisky Distillers Edition. After the initial maturation, the Distillers Editions are given a finishing period in Amoroso sherry cask. So it goes into an Amoroso sherry cask for some finishing, imparting some rich, juicy sherry notes to the traditionally rather smoky island dram. The aroma, gorgeous combination of sea spray and brine, oyster shells, and pink peppercorns, along with chewy malt, orange peel, and plenty of fruit to tame that pepper and smoke. It's a classic Talisker fire, but softer and sweeter. The taste. Think orange marmalade, then freshly ground black pepper, along with wood smoke and clove. That has a smokiness that builds, but it's kept in check with the sweet, juicy notes of orange, grapefruit, and lemon. The finish is like the dying embers of a fire with a sprinkling of aromatic citrus. Can't go wrong with Talisker, which Talisker was a little cheaper than it is, but definitely worth it. Moving along, number 8 on the list is Glenfiddich 14. So in my collection, I have the 12, the 14, and the 15, and I actually, of the three, like the 14 the best. The Glenfiddich 14-year-old Bourbon Barrel Reserve uniquely delivers the smooth sophistication of Scotland with the